I will come back and get your question for Rabbi Wolpe in just a second. Let me take, is it Jill, is it Jillian in New Hampshire on the phone? Julian.
Yes.
Go ahead, Julian.
Yes. I in no way advocate any type of vigilantism or any type of aggression toward anyone of Arab descent in this country. But when my own government informs me that there are sleeper agents in this country, when my own government informs me that there are people in this country still who intend on doing further harm, that this is not over, then don't tell me that I have to look at my Arab descending neighbor with open arms and assume that everything's fine because he's been in this country for a few years and he's just okay. Now, this is not the hysteria that we directed toward the Japanese in World War II, because let's remember, these people target non-combatants. Innocent women and children are the targets. We're the targets. The Army National Guard is there to protect us, and the Coast Guard is there to protect us. But they're going to hit us, civilians. They're not going to take it to the militia. And then these people's roles will be merely response roles.
There are also people like McVeigh and others who kill every day. Are you going to be treating them the same way? I think not. We have to live normally. We have to know each other. You see, we came on different ships, but now we are all in the same boat. We either row together to a peaceful shore or drown and separately.
Brett, your question for the rabbi.
Yeah. How do the images of the Palestinians celebrating the acts of terrorism change the world's perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts?
Well, I would say that I don't want to speak for the world. Speaking for myself, unfortunately, it was unsurprising to me to see that on the West Bank there were people carrying pictures of bin Laden and celebrating him as they burned the American flag. And I was unsurprised to hear that the Palestinian Authority threatened any photographer who took those pictures with imprisonment and confiscation of their camera, because unfortunately, even though I deeply believe that much of the Muslim world condemns terrorism against innocent civilians, I had many friends in Israel who emailed me and basically said, you know, welcome to our nightmare. Now, we had always hoped that Israel would become more like the United States, more open, more relaxed, easier, not afraid when you walk into restaurants, not afraid when you get on planes. But unfortunately, it looks like the United States is becoming more like Israel, more afraid,
Bobby,
and more knowledgeable about what this means.
Bobby, do you have also the segment where young Palestinian kids and their parents were also putting candles and flowers for the souls of those who have died? I think it's only fair to show both. What we see on the screen now are very few people, and therefore I think we should be fair in our presentation to the world on CNN.
Chris is on the phone from Georgia. Chris, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Imam. My question is this. The attacks were made by fundamentalist Muslims. It seems they were, for the most part, Saudi Arabian nationals. The origin for Islam is Saudi Arabia. Why have there been no condemnations or fatwas against the terrorists responsible for these acts from the mullahs of Mecca or Medina? Do they condone these actions? They must realize the adverse reaction to Islam in the United States.
Good question, Al-Haj.
You know, I couldn't hear him well. Could you repeat it?
He was wondering why there wasn't a fatwa, for example, or a universal condemnation placed on these people who are renegades from the Islamic faith, who do promote killing in the name of their faith.
Anyone who kills and claims he's doing in the name of his faith is not a religious person. Whether or not there is a fatwa or not, Islam stands on its own teaching. There is no condoning of killing any human being. Even animals you are not supposed to oppress or harm. So how could you have association between Islam and violence, or what we have seen, this horrible terrorist act over the United States.
I've got to interrupt once again to go to the news desk and Darren Kagan for an update. Darren?
Bobby, sorry to interrupt, but we do have breaking news, a development in the investigation. CNN getting word that a raid has been conducted by the FBI on a house in Delray Beach, Florida. Our Susan Candiotti is on the scene there in Delray Beach. Susan, can you tell us why this house and what the FBI is looking to find?
We're not certain why the FBI has returned to this particular location because they have been here before. They are back at the apartment of one of the 19 suspected hijackers identified by the FBI. This is an apartment, as you look up here, sources say another hijacker may also lived in this very same building. This one occupied by Saeed Al-Ghamdi. Sources say again someone else may also have lived here, one of the other suspected hijackers, Ahmed Al-Nami. Now, according to the Justice Department, Al-Ghamdi is one of 4 hijackers believed to have commandeered United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania that might have been heading also to the nation's capital. Now, federal agents we have observed have been taking in boxes and electrical cords, taking out garbage bags into this apartment building, some of the agents wearing protective suits. Now, this is a scene, we must tell you, that is being repeated nationwide as the FBI continues to comb the country, crisscrossing it, trying to find out who is behind the terrorist attacks and who may have been helping the hijackers who were involved. Now, as you can imagine, as this scene is repeated everywhere, residents who live in this apartment complex and in other neighborhoods around the country find this all very unnerving, as this woman will tell you.
I'd like to be more informed of what's going on just because we are living, so close to it. But, it's all hearsay, really, everything you see on the news and read in the paper. So, maybe just to be informed because of the fact that we do live here. But other than that, I guess they have to do what they have to do.
As you can see, a small crowd has gathered in this parking lot here as naturally the activity has drawn the attention of people who live around here, also a number of reporters and photographers, all of us waiting to learn more about what is going on. One of the things that the FBI is looking at, not only here in Florida but nationwide, is how the suspected hijackers were able to blend in the community, as apparently they were able to do, the suspected hijackers. For example, spending time at homes and apartments, not raising any extra attention or drawing attention to themselves, attending flight schools. They're looking at restaurants that they've gone to, for example. And here in South Florida, also an interesting point, it might have been easy for them to not draw any attention to themselves because it is a very transient community. So this is one thing that they're looking at. Also the fact that they brought their families with them, women believed to be their wives and children, some of whom were reportedly, according to some of the residents here, left before these attacks began. So these are one of many things that investigators are looking at nationwide, and we will stand by here to see if we can learn anything more about what happened here this day. Darren, back to you.
Susan, I just want to understand, as the FBI looks into this apartment here, is it under the idea that the suspects left it occupied, that their belongings are still inside, or are they looking at an apartment that's been emptied out?
Well, of course, it's unclear to us exactly what transpired because we've been unable to learn much information about why they've come back to this location. According to residents here, a search warrant was executed here earlier in the week, last Wednesday, we are told, and we don't know exactly why agents have returned this day, presumably to gather additional evidence.
Clearly something that has raised their suspicions and taken their interest. Susan Candiotti, thank you so much. I realize you just arrived there on the scene in Delray Beach, Florida. More from Susan just ahead. Now back to Bobby Batista and Talk Back Live.
All right, Darren, thanks very much. I was on my way to Newport, is that correct, in the audience?
Hi, I'm Nupur Sidhu. I'm a Sikh American, and from that perspective, I just want to say that on Tuesday, in light of all the attacks that took place, a lot of us are feeling sorrow, a lot of us are feeling grief, but the way to deal with that is not to commit another mistake, to fix one mistake. We have to realize that although retaliation seems like a good idea right now, emotions are running high, and we have to take it slow. Racial prejudice is also an awful thing. We have to encourage racial tolerance among us. Just because we bear a similar likeness to somebody else does not mean that we are them or that we support those ideas. So I think that we just need to realize that all of us in this nation that supports freedom and democracy, that we must unite, we must go forth in peace, and we must go forth with the determination that violence is not the answer.
I have an email from Cecilia in Knoxville,
Bravo.
Tennessee, who says religions cannot separate individuals from their responsibility to this country. The fact that bin Laden has called for Muslims all over the world to attack Americans increases what Muslims must do to convince others that they denounce what he has called them to do. Corbett, we're on the way to you.
Oh, we denounce him, of course.
I'd like to make my words brief. Basically, we're all spokes in the same wheel, and if you weaken one of those spokes with hatred, wrathful vengeance, and ignorance, then the wheel falls apart. And if the wheel falls apart, the cart can't go, and we can't make any progress.
Father Drinan, I've heard of some folks of the Christian faith say that they believe this was God's will. It was some sort of plan, perhaps, that God has. I know that's a way that they cope with this. Did God have anything to do with this?
If they say that, that's just bad Christianity. Let me, if I may, go back to the point that was made about the internment of the Japanese. Shortly after Pearl Harbor, the United States took 130,000 Japanese, many who were U.S. citizens, and put them into camps. I was on a presidential commission in the 1980s that concluded that this was unjustified, it was unnecessary, and lo and behold, the Congress of the United States gave indemnification to all of the survivors, and that they received a presidential pardon from Mr. Reagan. We should recognize that this moment, with the hysteria and the frenzy and the paranoia, we are quite capable of doing something that would be very wrong and that we would not recognize until years after that wrong.
God bless you, Father.
I wanted to actually address that point as well. I remember years ago when I visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, there was a tape running of survivors. And a story one of the survivors told was of watching someone else in the camps who was praying. And he said to him, "What could you possibly be praying for right now?" And he said, "Well, I'm thanking God." And he said, "What do you have to thank God for?" And his fellow inmate said, "I'm thanking God that he didn't make me like them." And I think what you hear both from your audience and also from the clergy is not that there must not be a response. There has to be a response. The question is to defend ourselves in a way that shows how worthy we are of defending, and to make sure that we address them without being like them.
We cannot blame God in any way. God is love and mercy. It is the devil within human beings who does the terrorists and bad acts. To be angry also at God, Rabbi, is un-Islamic. I don't think it's also part of the Abraham's teaching. We cannot...
with all due respect, actually, although I'm happy to take instruction from you on Islamic theology, in Jewish theology, it's actually an old and venerable tradition, and in fact it exists in the Bible, and in fact Abraham expresses anger at God. He says quite explicitly in the story of Sodom, "Will the judge of all the earth not do justice?" So I take some issue with that, but that's okay. Theological differences are good
It's all right,
ones.
Rabbi. We can agree to disagree.
Phew.
But in the Quran, in the Islamic way of life, we submit our will to God Almighty and never say, "I am angry." In our Quran, God never said that Abraham was angry at him. Anyway, that's another issue. But we as people of religion, I think we should work together, cooperate, and diffuse this war fervor that is going across the nation, across the world. Instead of declaring war, let's declare peace. Let's find where there is injustice and correct it, so that people all over the world would not revolt against the injustices that man puts over other people.
Let me take just a moment here to break up the conversation and go to New York City to Ground Zero, where CNN's Bill Hemmer has been for the last couple of days. Bill, what's going on there at this hour?
Well, I think it's appropriate, Bobby, to bring up at this time, you know, you're talking about faith, and we just watched a press briefing here about 90 minutes ago. We have not seen a press briefing lately begin until the chaplain comes out first to gather everyone in a moment of silence and a small prayer. And on your topic of religion and faith, I think that's quite reflective here in New York City. And throughout the area, we're seeing a number of different areas pop up where memorials are set up on street corners, and the candles burn here. It appears 24 hours a day as people again come to remember and memorialize. And I remember back to this past Friday when the president called for a national day of prayer and remembrance. The reports I was getting in Atlanta was that churches of all faiths